Hello, happy Saturday, happy summer. I'm live. I just want to give you guys a heads up. If you join me live today, I'm going to be doing a live Q&A for the first time. If you're a subscriber, you can go to my community, and then there you can go to. I have a question posted that says, what questions do you have about me, about teaching, about live, hi Suhani, about my travels, about my philosophy of education, about literature, about reading comprehension, how to achieve your goals academically, those kinds of things. And I've had a lot of good feedback. I have a lot of hard questions you guys have thrown me. I've glanced at them, but I've purposely not pondered them because I want to try and give you as authentic a reaction as I can. So if you want to ask me more questions and you happen to join the live now, you could go to my homepage, community, click on community, then there's a question there and you can just put it in the comments. In the meantime, we are making our way through this summer. It's been spring and summer. Chapter 18. It's called 9 Days. So let's see if we're in France or we're in London. The marriage day. It's the marriage day of, I just blanked on her name. Lucy Manette and Charles Darnay. The marriage day was shining brightly, and they were ready outside the closed door of the doctor's room where he was speaking with Charles Darnay. They were ready to go to church, the beautiful bride, Mr. Lorry, and Miss Pross, to whom the event, through a gradual process of reconcilement to the inevitable, would have been one of absolute bliss. But for the lingering consideration that her brother Solomon should have been the bridegroom. All right, that was a complicated sentence. Basically, it's saying Miss Pross is happy about it, except she still wishes that her son Solomon, he's kind of a bad boy, and she still kind of longed for him to be the groom, but she's accepted it. So overall, she's happy. You guys, if you've been with me for a long time, hi Jaspreet, my hair and I go round and round. I don't know why these little baby hairs are always standing up, but if you've stayed with me long enough, you've heard the continual fight of what my hair looks like. It would be so much better if I just didn't see myself on camera. Then I wouldn't be like, what's going on with that hair? Because during the day, I never think about it. And I'm sure I look the same way all day long. Little sprouts sprigging out all over the place. Just breathe. I'm well. Thank you. I hope you are too. So back to the wedding. And so, said Mr. Lorry, who could not sufficiently admire the bride and who had been moving round her to take in every point of her quiet, pretty dress. And so it was for this, my sweet Lucy, that I brought you across the channel, such a baby. Lord bless me. He's very much a father figure for her. How little I thought what I was doing, how lightly I valued the obligations I was conferring on my friend, Mr. Charles. You didn't mean it, remarked the matter-of-fact Miss Pross, and therefore how could you know it? Nonsense. Really? Well, but don't cry, said the gentle Mr. Lorry. I'm not crying, said Miss Pross. You are. And we get another peek into Mr. Lorry's character. I, my Pross? By this time, Mr. Lorry dared to be pleasant with her on occasion. You were just now. I saw you do it, and I don't wonder at it. Such a present of plate as you've made them is enough to bring tears into anybody's eyes. There's not a fork or spoon in the collection, said Miss Pross, that I didn't cry over last night after the box came till I couldn't see it. I'm highly gratified, said Mr. Lorry, though upon my honor I had no intention of rendering those trifling articles of remembrance invisible to anyone. Dear me, this is an occasion that makes a man speculate on all he has lost. Dear, 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 to think that there might have been a Mrs. Lorry any time as he's 50 years almost, so he's been a bachelor all this time. Not at all, from Miss Pross. You think there never might have been a Mrs. Lorry? Asked the gentleman of that name. Pooh, said Miss Pross. You were a bachelor in your cradle. She's like, you were not a man for marriage. Well, observed Mr. Lorry, beamingly adjusting to his little wig, that seems probable too. And you were cut out for a bachelor, pursued Miss Pross, before you were put in your cradle. Then I think, said Mr. Lorry, that I was very unhandsomely dealt with, and I ought to have had a voice in the selection of my pattern. She said, this is just your character, your nature. You weren't supposed to be a married man. And he's like, well, if that was my destiny, I wish I'd had something to say about it. D. Lamar, it's ongoing from spring. Oh my gosh, it's ongoing from spring reading, not summer reading, because I'm this far in, and I don't actually have any summer reads chosen, but I'm going to do 1984. I guess because I'm no longer teaching in the classroom, I don't really think of it as summer reading. I just think it as what needs to be read that are classics. So, but D. Lamar, I'm doing a question and answer after this. You've been with me for a long time. So if you have any questions that you want to ask me about teaching, about where I live, about my travels, about life, about reading, about languages, go to community on my homepage of YouTube. Go to community and put your questions in the comments there. I'd love to hear what you want to know about. So I like these characters, Miss Pross and Laurie, Mr. Laurie. They are the epitome of that second tier character. So they're not the primary character. They're not the lead character. They're the supporting characters. And they've got a lot of character. They banter with each other. They're caricatures, if you will. And she's picking on him for being an old bachelor. But remember, she's a single woman too. So I'm waiting to see if he'll push back. She's a bit of a biddy. You know, she's a little snippy. Hey, Gina, join me for a live in the next hour. I just want to keep putting it out there because I want people to come back and chat with me. Then I think, said Mr. Laurie, he said, that's not fair. I wish I had had something to say about it. I would have liked to have been married. Enough. Now, my dear Lucy, drawing his arm soothingly round her waist, I hear them moving in the next room, and Miss Pross and I, as two formal folks of business, are anxious not to lose final opportunity of saying something to you that you wish to hear. You leave your good father, my dear, in hands as earnest and as loving as your own. He shall be taken every conceivable care of during the next fortnight, because they're going to go on a honeymoon. While you're in Warwickshire and thereabouts, even Tellson shall go to the wall, comparatively speaking, for him. So we'll look after him while you're on your honeymoon. And when at the fortnight's end he comes to join you and your beloved husband on your other fortnight's trip in Wales, you shall say that we have sent him to you in the best health and in the happiest frame. So this is the way the author has given us information, and sometimes we miss that. So basically what that means is they're going on a 2-week honeymoon alone. Then they're going into another country, Wales, to finish another 2 weeks, because remember, fortnight is 2 weeks. They're going to spend another 2 weeks in Wales, and her father's going to join them for that part of their honeymoon trip. Very close group of people. A little odd, right? But she worries about her father so much because he's got that PTSD, and she's afraid without her, with being in our absence for too long, he'll slip back to the way he used to be. Now I hear somebody's step coming to the door. Let me kiss my dear girl with an old-fashioned bachelor blessing before somebody comes to claim his own. For a moment he held the fair face from him to look at the well-remembered expression on the forehead, and then laid the bright golden hair against his little brown wig with a genuine tenderness and delicacy which, if such things be old-fashioned, were as old as Adam. The door of the doctor's room opened, and he came out with Charles Darnay. He was so deadly pale, which had not been the case when they went in together, that no vestige of color was to be seen in his face, but in the composure of his manner he was unaltered, except that the shrewd glance of Mr. Laurie, it disclosed some shadowy indication that the old air of avoidance and dread had lately passed over him like a cold wind. Now, don't forget, this is when Darnay was to tell him his secret. So we've seen that he's pale, but he's trying to be, I'm okay. He doesn't want to ruin his daughter's wedding, but something is shaking him up. So we all, as the reader, know what's going on. We know who Darnay is. We don't know all of it. I do, because I've read the book before. But we know that Darnay has revealed his heritage to Dr. Manette, and Dr. Manette is very shaken by this. He gave his arm to his daughter and took her downstairs to the chariot which Mr. Laurie had hired in honor of the day. The rest followed in another carriage, and soon in a neighboring church, where no strange eyes looked on. Charles Darnay and Lucy Manette were happily married. We aren't speaking of summer. I'm speaking of summer in my mind. My lawn service just cut the grass, and it's got that fresh cut green grass smell, And so my allergies are just like really starting to kick in. You can, it's been really rainy here in Louisiana, so the grass has gotten very tall. So the cut grass is really high and very lush. It's very, if you want to see how green it is, it's very lush. But oh, that smell of summer. There's nothing like it. It's the summer smell of fresh cut grass. And it kind of permeates your nose, doesn't it? They returned home to breakfast and all went well. Oh, I skipped. Where no strange eyes looked on Charles Darnay and Lucy Manette were happily married. So it's just that close, intimate family. Backyard tour. That was it. That's all of my backyard. It's teeny tiny. I live in what we call a garden home. So and the lawn service never puts my chairs back. They just throw them around. So I need to go put my lawn chairs back. But that's it. And the playground from my granddaughter. Very, very boring, very unimaginative, not very fancy. So tiny little spot. But that's all I need. I live here by myself. So I just like my granddaughter to come and play. The kids come hang out. Isn't that all we need? I don't need to say a lot about it. Playground set for granddaughter. Cut grass, it makes my nose itch. Lawn chairs that are scattered about from the lawn service. I can revisit it. There we did 2 tours, Gina. So they had the wedding, and it was just that intimate. The Pross, Lori, Manette, and the bride and groom, and the officiant. Besides the glancing tears that shone among the smile of the little group when it was done, some diamonds, very bright and sparkling, glanced on the bride's hand, which were newly released from the dark obscurity of one of Mr. Lorry's pockets. Mr. Lorry gave her a gift. They returned home to breakfast, and all went well, and in due course the golden hair that had mingled with the poor shoemaker's white locks in the Paris garret were mingled with them again in the morning sunlight on the threshold of the door at parting. It was a hard parting, though it was not for long, but her father cheered her and said at last, gently disengaging himself from her enfolding arms, "Take her, Charles. She's yours." And her agitated hand waved to them from a chaise window, and she was gone. So off they go. The chaise window is like the buggy. She's in the carriage. And so off they go on their honeymoon. The father's trying to be brave about it. The corner being out of the way of the idle and curious, and the preparations having been very simple and few, the doctor, Mr. Lorry, and Miss Prouse were left quite alone. It was when they turned into the welcome shade of the cool old hall that Mr. Lorry observed a great change to have come over the doctor, as if the golden arm uplifted there had struck him a poisoned blow. He had naturally repressed much, and some revulsion might have been expected of him when the occasion for repression was gone. Like he tried to be brave when he's trying to be brave, Dr. Manette, but now Mr. Lorry, who's really observant of Dr. Manette, says, "Oh, something's amiss. Something's amiss." Dee Lamar, what a good host. Thank you. So he sees that something shifted. He had naturally repressed much, but it was the old, scared, lost look that troubled Mr. Lorry, and through his absent manner of clasping his head and drearily wandering away into his own room when they got upstairs, Mr. Lorry was reminded of Defarge, the wine shop keeper, and the Starlight Ride. "I think," he whispered to Miss Pross after anxious consideration, "I think we had best not speak to him just now, or at all disturb him. I must look in at Tellson's, so I will go there at once and come back presently. Then we will take him for a ride into the country and dine there, and all will be well." It was easier for Mr. Lorry to look in at Tellson's than to look out of Tellson's. He was detained, like it's easier for him to go there than to get away. He was detained 2 hours. When he came back, he ascended the old staircase alone, having asked no question of the servant. Going thus into the doctor's rooms, he was stopped by a low sound of knocking. "Good God," he said with a start. "What's that?" Miss Pross, with a terrified face, was at his ear. "Oh me, all is lost," cried she, wringing her hands. "What is to be told to Ladybird?" "That's Lucy. He doesn't know me and is making shoes." So he's gone back, he's triggered, and he's gone back to thinking he's in the prison. Mr. Lorry said what he could to calm her and went himself into the doctor's room. The bench was turned towards the light, as it had been when he had seen the shoemaker at his work before, and his head was bent down, and he was very busy. Dr. Manette? My dear friend, Dr. Manette. The doctor looked at him for a moment, half inquiringly, half as if he were angry at being spoken to, and bent over his work again. Hey, Dinah. You're not missing. This is the read, and this Lucy's married to Darnay, and now Dr. Manette has gone back into the old ways of being in prison. Dinah, did you put questions in for my Q&A? Because I'm really curious to know what you're going to ask me. I think you did, but I don't remember. He had laid aside his coat and waistcoat. His shirt was open at the throat, as it used to be when he did that work. And even the old, haggard, faded surface of face had come back to him. He worked hard, impatiently, as if in some sense of having been interrupted. Mr. Lorry glanced at the work in his hand and observed that it was a shoe of the old size and shape. He took up another that was lying by him and asked what it was. A young lady's walking shoe, he muttered, without looking up. It ought to have been finished long ago. Let it be. But Dr. Manette, look at me. He obeyed in the old mechanically submissive manner, without pausing in his work. You know me, my dear friend. Think again. This is not your proper occupation. Think, dear friend. Nothing would induce him to speak more. He looked up for an instant at a time when he was requested to do so, but no persuasion would extract a word from him. He worked and worked and worked in silence, and words fell on him as they would fallen on an echoless wall or on the air. The only ray of hope that Mr. Lorry could discover was that he sometimes furtively looked up without being asked, like furtively, like, did I hear something? Was that something? In that, there seemed a faint expression of curiosity or perplexity, as though he were trying to reconcile some doubts in his mind. Hazel, I'm glad you're here. He's regressing. Yeah, Dinah, that's exactly right. Remember, you missed the very beginning of this. Darnay had to reveal the secret, and the secret is the heritage. Now, if you're new to the story, you don't know what's the importance or the impact of that on Dr. Manette, but it's clearly shaken him and sent him back to being in prison. We're all waving. I'm waving. You have to capture the wave. Everybody wave. If you know how to wave. Sometimes you don't know. I don't know how to wave on my laptop. I only know how to do it on my phone. Two things at once impressed themselves on Mr. Lorry as important above all others. The first, that this must be kept secret from Lucy. The second, that it must be kept secret from all who knew him. In conjunction with Miss Pross, he took immediate steps towards the latter precaution by giving out that the doctor was not well and required a few days' complete rest. In aid of the kind description to be practiced on his daughter, Miss Pross was to write, describing his having been called away professionally and referring to an imaginary letter of 2 or 3 hurried lines in his own hand, represented to have been addressed to her by the same post. These measures, advisable to be taken in any case, Mr. Lorry took in the hope of his coming to himself. If that should happen soon, like regaining his composure, if that should happen soon, he kept another course in reserve, which was to have a certain opinion that he thought the best on the doctor's case. In the hope of his recovery and of resort to this third course being thereby rendered practicable, Mr. Lorry resolved to watch him attentively. Practicable is an old-fashioned word. We say practical now, but it's the same word. He therefore made arrangements to absent himself from Tellson's for the first time in his life and took his post by the window of the same room. So he's going to watch guard over Dr. Manette. He was not long in discovering that it was worse than useless to speak to him, since, on being pressed, he became worried. He abandoned that attempt in the first day and resolved merely to keep himself always before him as a silent protest against the delusion into which he had fallen, or was falling. He remained, therefore, in his seat near the window, reading and writing, and expressing in as many pleasant and natural ways as he could think of that it was a free place. Dr. Manette took what was given him to eat and drink and worked on that first day, and until it was too dark to see, worked on half an hour after Mr. Lorry could not have seen for his life to read or write, when he put his tools aside as useless until morning. Mr. Lorry rose and said to him, "Will you go out?" He looked down at the floor on either side of him in the old manner, looked up in the old manner, and repeated in the old low voice, "Out? Yes, for a walk with me. Why not?" He made no effort to say why not, and said not a word more. But Mr. Lorry thought he saw, as he leaned forward on his bench in the dusk, with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands, that he was in some misty way asking himself, why not? The my friend Kelly always helps me with this word, sagacity of the man, that's wisdom of the man of business, perceived an advantage here and determined to hold it. Miss Pross and he divided the night into 2 watches and observed him at intervals from the adjoining room. He paced up and down for a long time before he lay down, but when he did finally lay himself down, he fell asleep. In the morning he was up betimes and went straight to his bench and to work. On the second day, Mr. Lorry saluted him cheerfully by his name and spoke to him on topics that had been of late familiar to them. He returned no reply, but it was evident that he had heard what was said and that he thought about it, however confusedly. Mr. Lorry's trying to reach him and pull him back to the present. Mr. Lorry to have Miss Pross in with her work several times during the day. At those times, they quietly spoke of Lucy and of her father, then present, precisely in the usual manner, and as if there was nothing amiss. This was done without any demonstrative accompaniment, not long enough or often enough to harass him, and it lightened Mr. Lorry's friendly heart to believe that he looked up oftener and that he appeared to be stirred by some perception of inconsistency surrounding him. When it fell dark again, Mr. Lorry asked him as before, "Dear doctor, will you go out?" D. Lamar, I'm almost done with this chapter. Then I'll probably finish this in about 10 minutes, take a quick break, get something to drink, change where I'm going to read from because it's hot out here, and be back to do the live Q&A. When it fell dark again, Mr. Lorry asked him, "Will you go out?" "Out? Yes, for a walk with me. Why not?" This time, Mr. Lorry feigned to go out when he could extract no answer from him, and after remaining absent for an hour, returned. In the meanwhile, the doctor had removed to the seat in the window and had sat there looking down at the plane tree. But on Mr. Lorry's return, he slipped away to his bench. The time went very slowly on, and Mr. Lorry's hope darkened, and his heart grew heavier again, and grew yet heavier and heavier every day. The third day came and went, the fourth, the fifth, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, 8 days, 9 days. This repetition shows us that he stays in this state for 9 days. With a hope ever darkening and with a heart always growing heavier and heavier, Mr. Lorry passed through this anxious time. The secret was well kept, and Lucy was unconscious and happy, but he could not fail to observe that the shoemaker, she's unaware of what's going, not unconscious, like knocked out, whose hand had been a little out of fit at first, was growing dreadfully skillful, and that he had never been so intent on his work, and that his hands had never been so nimble and expert as in the dusk of the 9th evening. So when it stops there, that tells us probably something's going to change on the 9th evening. So let's see where our vocabulary. This is 17 through 21. And I'm on 19. So these are some of the questions. What happens to Dr. Manette after Lucy? Now, remember, we're going to go through questions of plot. So what happens to Dr. Manette after Lucy and Charles leave on their honeymoon? I like, and Dinah, you used the word relapse. He's relapsed in the 9 days. How do Mr. Lorry and Miss Pross try to help? They're trying to keep things as normal as they can, and they're not letting Lucy know, and they're not telling the neighbors or the other servants. And we don't, the rest of the questions are not, we haven't read yet. Then we go to characters and motives. Lucy's again referred to as the golden thread as we see the effects of her influence upon others. How does she show her devotion to Dr. Manette? Should Lucy be so concerned for her father as to put her own happiness second to his? I would love to know mental health professionals' view on this relationship. Is she a codependent, Lucy? Because she's got this sense that all of her life has to be put on hold to take care of and protect her father and his problems. So that is kind of codependency. So I'd really be curious to see these characters in the hands of a really good mental health professional. The questions there are, we're not that far in the story yet. How does Mr. Lorry continue to show himself a devoted friend to the family? Well, he stays by his side. He quits work. Social and historical. Why did the revolutionists attack the Bastille first? Have we attacked the Bastille at this point? Those of you who know history know about Bastille Day. Bastille was the storming of the fishmongers' wives to get weapons and to attack the nobility because of the abuse and the hunger. Their children were dying, and so they rose up in revolution. They tear it. It asks, like, you guys can read the questions. I just answer them. It asks, how do the revolutionists treat the guards at the Bastille? Horrifically. They rip the Bastille apart stone by stone, and they kill everybody. They throw some of the people off from the top of the Bastille, and it's very murderous. But that must be, we must read that, and we haven't read it yet. Let's see. Do you agree with the philosophy that in the moonlight, which is always sad, as the light of the sun itself, as the light called human life is, as it's coming and it's going? Do you consider the moonlight to be sad? Or do we consider, we aren't there yet. You're right, Dinah. I got ahead of myself. But do you consider the moonlight sad, or do you consider it romantic and safe? Because in literature, nighttime and moonlight are foreshadowing of something dangerous to come. Okay, so we're not going to talk about that because I'm moving on. So here are our words for today. Lethargic, vestige, detained, submissive, illusion, malady, diffidence, oblivion, pensive. No, we aren't that far. Let me see how far we go to 181. All right, these just 4 words. Lethargic. The lost explorer became lethargic with lack of sleep and food. So what do we think lethargic means? Nervous and excitable, gloomy and hopeless, drowsy and listless, lively and optimistic. So there could be too, if you have lack of sleep and food, you could be nervous and excitable. All of these could be appropriate. So see, Gina, that's why it's important to notice those things in literary discussion, because things have changed over time. Again, the idea of what is a romantic hero has changed. What is manly has changed. What are relationships? In our generation, a lot of those things have changed, and they were the societal norms of the day. So it's important that you're aware of the different meanings as you go through reading things that have a significantly different time period to them. And when we're attacking word use, we try and use extract meanings. The lost explorer became lethargic with lack of sleep and food. So lively and optimistic could be eliminated, but the other 3 could all be possible if you don't know what the word means. And you are right, Gina, it is drowsy and listless. How would one come up with that? Well, maybe you know the root word of lethargy. Lethar. I don't know what that root means. Ethos might be feeling. I don't know the root of lethargy. Vestige. Did the archaeologists find any vestige of a lost civilization in the jungles of Honduras? So we're looking for a replacement word. Did they find any example, any hint, any sign of? So our choices are memory, trace, intense degree, repetition. So if you can try and see contextually what you think they're looking for, let's go. I don't know what it means, Gina. I lost track of where we are. You were ready to move to something else? I still am not at 30 minutes yet, though. Detained. He was detained for 2 hours. Stopped off at the photographers for the pictures, who won't be detained long. Pictured, spoken to, scolded, delayed. Oh, I got it. It means let's go. I got you. I knew it meant let's go, but why were we going? I was confused about that. So yeah, you got that one right. How about detained? Is it pictured, spoken to, scolded, or delayed? And the last one we're going to do, submissive. The subjects of the tyrant were kept submissive through fear of torture and even death. So you have to know what a tyrant is, like a mean king or a mean leader. were kept submissive. Sub means below, so you can take that hint, through fear and torture and even death. And then, so it's a negative. So is submissive obedient, offensive, oppressive, openly pleased? And that is, thanks guys for interpreting for me. I appreciate it. So submissive means obedient, to be obedient to someone, but obedient out of fear pretty much, or maybe out of respect. You can be submissive out of respect. No, that doesn't go there. This goes there. All right, guys. So I'm going to go inside where there is, I admit it, air conditioning, because it's muggy in Louisiana. And I will set up my camera up there. Gina, you could get a lot of quotes from my goofiness because I don't always understand things. And I'm just old enough to say, I don't get it. D. Lamar, I'm going to hang up. I'm going to close the screen. I'm going to set up where it's a little bit cooler and where maybe the light's better so that we feel a little more conversant. And I'm going to look over the questions. It looks like people have been adding even as we speak. And we'll have a nice Q&A. I'm looking forward to it. So if you haven't subscribed, do it because I want to keep growing. If you don't know it already, I will say with my signature close, I will read to you next time, but I'll Q&A you in a few minutes. See ya.